Contrast is a really important aspect of design, and usually when we're talking about contrast, we're talking about value contrast. That means your text and your background need to be very different in terms of lightness and darkness in order to maintain readability, right? Now, contrast doesn't always have to be extremely black and white like we have here. Usually your design can still be readable even if you have a background that is not pure black but still relatively dark in comparison to your text, or whatever element that you want to be the focal point, that you want to be really prominent. I talk a lot about text when I'm talking about contrast because that is such a big issue with student designs. Students will choose text colors that are really too close in value to their background, often resulting in designs that are very, very hard to read. So I just want to show you here that contrast doesn't have to be pure black and white, but when we start to lower the opacity of that blackness and make it really close in value to the text, it easily becomes very, very hard to read. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to have pure black or grayscale in your design. Watch, I'm going to throw a adjustment layer over this design. This time I'll use, let's do hue saturation, colorize it. So see, regardless of what colors I use, there still is contrast because the values are so much darker than the text. Now you can get a low contrast design to work. It's going to have a different sort of feeling to it, and it still is very important that your text maintains readability. So this high contrast design feels very dynamic. It feels kind of very powerful and kind of forceful, right? Now this low contrast design has a little bit more of a nuanced, sort of elegant, sort of like whispering, misty sort of feeling to it. The reason that this is still readable is because I put that little tiny drop shadow around contrast to make it pop from that light gray background. So you can do little tricks like this using your layer styles in Photoshop or any of your Adobe CS programs. I just double click on that layer that I want to apply the drop shadow to, and then I double click on the drop shadow and then change the settings to get that drop shadow to show up and maintain readability. So at this point, students start to think that, okay, I have to have a design that's either high contrast or low contrast. Well, actually, you can have a design that includes both high contrast and low contrast elements. Often this creates the feeling of something called atmospheric perspective. You guys have experienced atmospheric perspective if you've ever gone on a hike in the mountains. When you get up to the top of that mountain and you look out over the horizon and you see all the distant mountains, you'll notice that the mountains in the way, way far distant are kind of lighter, lower contrast, kind of purpley or hazy looking, and the mountains that are closer to you are high contrast, and you can see a more fuller range of values in the shadows and highlights of those nearer mountain peaks. That's atmospheric perspective, and we can use this idea of atmospheric perspective in our own designs. So if you want one element to be really prominent, to be the focal point, you make that element high contrast, as I did with this circle in the foreground here. I made it black, I put the text in it white, right? That means like this feels like it's closer to us, right? And then all the other polka dots are gray, but they're not just a single value of gray. The big polka dot that's right behind the black polka dot is a dark gray, giving you the feeling that it's closer than the slightly lighter gray polka dot in the background, and that this polka dot is a lot darker than the slightly lighter polka dots that are in the background there. So as the polka dots get lighter and lighter, you get this feeling of atmospheric perspective that those design elements are farther away. Okay, so contrast, you can certainly make designs that are all high contrast. You can make designs that are low contrast as long as they're readable and as long as you create some sort of contrasting element that makes the text or that element pop. But some really effective designs are designs that use both high contrast and low contrast, and it works if you have a clear focal point. If you have one design element that is like most important, you make that high contrast, and then you use your atmospheric perspective to make lower contrast elements in the background. And usually this ends up working, it ends up looking pretty cool.